Okay, well, welcome, and it's right on time. I like to start on time, so hopefully we can end on time and not abuse your goodwill. Anyway, let's start in prayer. Heavenly Father, we are so aware of what is happening in the nation of Israel, and we are simply overwhelmed by what is going on. It seems like evil continually triumphs, but we know it ultimately will not. Today, as we look into your word, guide our thoughts, guide our understanding, and especially, Lord, guide my words so they reflect your truth. We ask this in Jesus' name. Amen. Amen. All right, so I don't know who's braver, me for doing this course or you for coming back, but I've been enjoying it, and I like to start each day, or each session, with leftovers. So from last week, is there anything you want to discuss that was left over? And you said, geez, I wish I could have said something or asked something, and I didn't. So this is leftover time. Okay.
Eschatology.
Yes.
I have it in my notes.
Eschatology is the study of final things. Final things. Now, there's two aspects to it. Final things as it pertains to our life, what happens to us, and eschatology as it pertains to everything globally. But it's final things. I love the big words, you know. Okay. Anything else? I'm glad you asked. Don't let that slip by without asking. Okay. As you know, I'm following to some degree Dr. Sproul's book, but not religiously. You know, sort of like a guideline, but it's a point of reference for the most part. Now, Sylvia and I are celebrating, she doesn't even know this yet, we're celebrating our 50th anniversary of being born-again Christians. Huh? Celebrating, it's coming up. All right. I was more of a pagan back then than I am now. But now I'm a saved pagan, then I was an unsaved one. So, what happened? We went on a retreat, and, you know, we were looking for God, and God apparently was looking for us, and we met each other, and we've had this wonderful born-again experience. And it stayed with us, these 50 years. Now, in the retreat center, they had that book. And at the time, I was such a pagan, I didn't know that was a Bible. I picked it up and said, this is a very interesting book. But it's the Bible. And I read it through, and I said, this is great. But then I got to some parts which simply didn't make sense. And I read it, like I said, as a book, and then you hit the hard parts, and you get totally confused. And then when you get to end times, then there's a lot of bizarre interpretation of what happens at the end times. So hopefully we can deal with that in this. So again, welcome and thank you for your bravery. So we're going to talk about the Olivet Discourse. This is a very important yet difficult section of the New Testament. It can be difficult. Therefore, we just jump right in where angels fear to tread. And let me read it. If you have a Bible, that's fine. I'm reading from the NIV, which is really my favorite. And I'm going to read from chapter 24. I'll do about a dozen verses, starting in verse 1. And it says, Jesus left the temple and was walking away when his disciples came up to him to call his attention to its buildings. Do you see these things? He asked. I tell you the truth, not one stone here will be left on another. Every one will be thrown down. As Jesus was sitting on the Mount of Olives, the disciples came to him privately. Tell us, they said, when will this happen, and what will be the sign of your coming and of the end of the age? Jesus answered, watch out that no one deceives you, for many will come in my name, claiming, I am the Christ, and will deceive many. And you will hear wars and rumors of wars, but see to it that you are not alarmed. Such things must happen, but the end is still to come. Nation will rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom. There will be famines and earthquakes in various places. All these are the beginning of birth pains. Then they will hand you over to be persecuted and put to death. You will be hated by all nations because of me. At that time, many will turn away from the faith and will betray each other. And many false prophets will appear and deceive many people. Because of the increase of wickedness, the love of most will grow cold. But he who stands firm to the end will be saved, and the gospel of this kingdom will be preached in the whole world as a testimony to all nations, and then the end will come. So when you see in the holy place the abomination that causes desolation, spoken of through the prophet Daniel, let the reader understand, then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. Let no one on the roof of his house go down to take anything out of the house. Let no one in the field go back to get his cloak. How dreadful it would be in those days for pregnant women and nursing mothers. Pray that your flight will not take place in winter or on the Sabbath, for it would be great distress, unequaled from the beginning of the world until now, and never to be equaled again. If those days had not been cut short, no one would survive, but for the sake of the elect, those days will be shortened. And if that time, if anyone says to you, look, here's the Christ, or there he is, do not believe it. For false Christs and false prophets will appear and perform great signs and miracles to deceive even the elect, if that were possible. See, I have told you ahead of time. So here's a little cartoon. It's called Animal Crackers. And for some reason, the lion and the dodo bird are sitting down together. And they're watching TV in the middle of wherever they're at. The truth is out there. And the dodo says, the trouble is, everybody tells a different version of it. So that's the problem. Can we get the right version of it? Is there a right version of it? So over here, I have a very crude timeline. The crucifixion, resurrection, and destruction of the temple are solid time anchors. So 33, this is crucifixion, resurrection. And then we have destruction of the temple is going to be in 70. And here we are in 2023. Timeline, time anchors. So everything, timing is everything, they say. Well, let's consider. There's a how should I say, a theory or a method. There's a method of putting events into the past, and that's called preterism, which comes from preter, which means past. And there's two versions of it. Radical preterism, and it says that all the prophecies of the Olivet Discourse and elsewhere in the New Testament have all been fulfilled already. Okay? Moderate preterism says, a little of this, a little of that, says that while most prophecies were fulfilled in the first century, there are still some yet unfulfilled. Can you think of one that hasn't been fulfilled yet? Second coming. Right? Second coming is not fulfilled. And some are continuing to be fulfilled. So, we have this thought, you have a line and then another line. But as I think about it, some of these prophecies continue throughout time. For example, well, we'll get to it. The next one is futurism. Futurism says all prophecies are yet to be fulfilled in the future. Okay, so the abomination of desolation. Where's this guy standing? In the temple. What do you do if there's no temple? You hope and work towards and pray that there's yet another temple. And the question is, can there yet be another temple? Oh, why not? Why not? What happened in the temple? Yes?
We don't sacrifice anymore.
Yeah, we don't sacrifice animals anymore. And that was all sign and symbol of Jesus coming. As a matter of fact, Jesus died at the third hour of the afternoon when they started slaying the Paschal lambs. Perfect juxtaposition. Lamb slaughter began, he gave up the ghost. On April 3rd, 33, that was exactly the time. Perfect timing. All right, so we have a choice. Were prophetic events fulfilled in the past, either totally or partially, or will they all be fulfilled in the future, totally. Well, all right. The primary key is the timing. Are these events to be past? And as I say, around AD 70, because they kind of circle around the destruction of the temple, or future, AD 2023 and beyond. I have to show you this. Some of you have seen this already. For those who haven't, I think you might enjoy it. What?
Let's see through.
You want me to sit down?
Yes.
Towards the end of the Second Temple period, in the 18th year of his reign, Herod, king of Judah, gathers the people of Jerusalem and surprises them with a dramatic announcement. Herod states his intention to raise the old temple, built on Mount Moriah, by the returnees from Babylon, and to build a new temple in its place, the most sacred and beautiful of our time. The Jews are appalled. The thought that this tyrant, who has murdered thousands of people, would tamper with their holiest site merely for the sake of self-aggrandizement terrifies them. They're afraid that Herod will destroy the old temple without completing the construction of the new one, leaving them without a place to serve God, neither the old nor the new. The people are frantic. What will happen? Josephus recounts that Herod reassured the Jews by promising to prepare all the building materials in advance, before even one stone is removed from the existing temple. According to the Talmud, the story involves a secret agreement between Herod and a Jewish sage by the name of Baba ben Buta. In a private meeting, Herod expresses regret for his past violence against the Jews and agrees to atone by building a glorious new temple that will spread its light around the world. He extinguished the light of the world, let him now go and kindle the light of the world. This agreement opens a historic window of opportunity. The great builder of Caesarea, Masada, Herodium, and countless other projects, joins forces with the Jewish people. Together, they will turn the small, modest temple in Jerusalem into a large, magnificent house of worship that will leave a deep imprint on humanity. The work begins with a tremendous burst of activity. Herod gathers thousands of carts and beasts of burden, cranes, wooden pulley blocks, engineering devices, and quarrying tools of all kinds. 10,000 Jewish workers, along with the top engineers in the Roman world, tackle the job. Hundreds of priests take care of building the sacred areas. But one problem still threatens to thwart the entire project: Mount Moriah. The site designated for the new temple is narrow and steep. The area available for construction is limited and certainly not suitable for the monumental compound that Herod envisioned. Herod's solution is bold and ambitious. Build huge walls that would support a giant plaza and then construct the temple in the center of the plaza. The most important part of the plan is the use of enormous building stones to ensure the stability of the Temple Mount walls. Look at these stones. Each stone weighs a few tons. The biggest stones weigh hundreds of tons each. This one, for example, weighs 600 metric tons. Without any mortar at all, the tremendous weight of the stones stabilizes them in place as if they were one solid rock. Transporting such a stone from the quarry north of the Temple Mount and placing it in the Temple Mount walls requires precise planning, sophisticated technology, and most importantly, a lot of hard work. This entire slope was one big quarry. Many stones measuring 2 to 4 meters long have been found in the Arzei Habirah quarry. We could see how we have a negative image of the Western Wall stones here in the Arzei Habirah quarries. We discovered an amazing axe. An axe is a wonderful quarrying tool. When you strike the Jerusalem limestone with 2.3 kilograms and try to create a channel, the channel forms very quickly. Primitive tools on the whole, but methods that work to this day. These stones were brought in carts hitched to oxen. Some of the stones were encircled with wooden wheels so that they could be moved quickly and efficiently. Particularly, large stones were placed on long log rollers and moved by a large team of workers with the help of animals. To lift the stones up high, the workers used cranes, pulleys, and smoked earthen embankments. The stones were put in place with the utmost precision. This was made possible by a technique known as Herodian drafted margin masonry. By creating a border around the stone, the workers could join the stone precisely with the course beneath it and with the stone next to it, producing a perfectly straight row. Each new course of stones was placed a few centimeters deeper than the previous one, as in a pyramid. The way the stones were joined at the corners of the Temple Mount made the structure so strong that it survived even the most powerful earthquakes in Israel over the centuries. Quarrying, transporting, lifting, setting in place. All these jobs required precision like a well-timed orchestra, but this did not always happen. This stone, for instance, fell off the western wall while the work was in progress, and it got stuck here in the drainage channel at the foot of the western wall. For the workers' sake, I hope no one told Herod. Course after course, the walls are built, from the natural rock deep underground to the tremendous height of 30 meters above street level. The dimensions of the Temple Mount are mind-boggling. The western wall that we know is just a small part of a huge wall 500 meters long. To give you an idea, the total area of the Temple Mount is 144,000 square meters, equal to the area of 30 soccer fields. But the Temple Mount is just the frame. The main task, the construction of the temple itself, still lies ahead. We have to hurry. The workers work non-stop, from dawn to dark. Reportedly, even after a night of hard rain, they didn't miss a day's work. The next morning, the wind blew, the clouds dispersed, the sun shone, and the people went out to work. And they knew they were engaged in the work of heaven. But despite the pressure, some things take precedence. On Friday, the feverish pace slows, and before the Sabbath, the work stops completely. Jerusalem is enveloped by the Sabbath rest. I'm standing here next to a corner of the Temple Mount. This is the cornerstone of the Temple Mount. And it was the first stone that the Romans knocked down after capturing the city when they started to destroy the Temple Mount walls. An inscription was discovered on this stone. It was written in Hebrew, beautiful Hebrew. Let's read it together. For the house of trumpeting too. I am inclined to agree with those who complete it as follows. For the house of trumpeting to distinguish between the sacred and the profane. And that brings us to Josephus, the historian of that period, who tells us that on the eve of the Sabbath, a priest would go up, trumpet in hand, and blow the trumpet to announce the start of the Sabbath. Whoever was working at the time would stop. Here we are in the streets, the main street of Jerusalem, with shops on either side. So anyone who had a shop here would certainly have to shut it immediately because the Sabbath was starting. After filling the space between the supporting walls of Mount Moriah with large stone arches, the builders embarked on the next stage, building a huge plaza on which the temple would stand. Tens of thousands of believers from Israel and the diaspora would assemble in this plaza. The plan called for them to stand on a floor decorated according to the finest standards of Roman architecture.
From Josephus' writings, we knew that the Temple Mount was paved with multicolored stones. Then tiles began showing up in the material we were sifting from the Temple Mount. tiles of various varieties of stone in many colors and many different shapes. I had the feeling that some of these were the ones that Josephus had written about. We had found them. This was a fascinating puzzle to assemble. By measuring the sizes and the shapes of the original tiles, I could determine what patterns may have been used. The geometric shapes and brilliant stone colors were right in front of my eyes. For me, it was the closing of a personal circle. I was raised in the Catholic Church in the United States until I discovered my Jewish roots and immigrated to Israel. And now I reconstruct the floors on which my ancestors and the ancestors of all the Jewish people walked 2,000 years ago.
Around the Temple Mount Plaza, porticos and magnificent columns were built, the stoas. The most magnificent of all was the Royal Stoa. The Royal Stoa was where the Al-Aqsa Mosque is today, behind me. Known as Stoa Basilia, this was the largest building in Israel until the modern era. In Antiquities of the Jews, Josephus Fabius describes the building as a forest of columns. It contained 162 columns, each made of a single stone. It would take 3 men with outstretched arms to encircle one column. This structure, which was a sort of basilica, was used for secular purposes. It is the location of the shops where the Sanhedrin met after being exiled from the Hall of Hewn Stones adjacent to the temple. To allow entrance to the Royal Stoa, a monumental staircase was built that rose up from a vibrant shopping center here at the foot of the western wall. A huge arch, Robinson's Arch, supported an elevated passage that crossed the busy street without disrupting traffic. The main entrance to the Temple Mount were the Hulda gates in the southern wall. 2 gates were planned, an entrance and an exit. This ensured that the huge crowds would flow in and out quickly and efficiently. The great width of the steps leading to the gates created an atmosphere of splendor and reverence. The stairs were designed with treads of varying sizes, forcing the pilgrims into a relaxed, dignified pace as they ascended to the holy place. When they emerged at the Temple Mount Plaza, the pilgrims saw an astonishing sight. The huge plaza, the Stoa, the courts, the ornate gates. At the top of the hill, towering to the heavens, rose the temple building itself. Wide in front and narrow in back, the temple reminded the ancients of a seated lion, his mane facing forward. A grapevine made of sparkling gold leaf curved upward from the entrance to the temple building. Golden adornments shone on the roof as on a royal crown. The construction work was completed in record time. In just a year and a half, the Jews, under Herod's direction, finished building the temple. The residents of Jerusalem looked at their handiwork. Before them rose one of the largest, most magnificent houses of prayer in the entire world. Even Titus, who destroyed the temple, declared it the glory of human creation. Whoever has not seen Herod's building has never seen a beautiful building in their life. Tens of thousands of pilgrims, Jews and non-Jews alike, thronged the new temple to worship the God of Israel. They came from around the world to see the biggest sacred compound ever built. A temple built for an invisible God, with no images or idols. Its gates open to everyone. A house of prayer for all nations.
So I wanted to show you that because we don't really appreciate the size and magnificence of the temple proper. The apostles are saying, wow, look at these buildings. It helps us to visualize that. Talking about 30 soccer fields, of diameter, 35 acres actually, magnificent. Look at the relative height of that. I think that's like 300 feet up from the priest's courtyard up to the top of the holy place. Incredible, okay? Just incredible. And they did that with, ancient tools, really. Quite remarkable. Okay, so this is Herod's temple, and really, so much of the prophetic event of the Olivet Discourse centers around this and its destruction. So you might see over here, if I can get out of the way, we have 33 AD, which is, of course, is when Jesus died, rose, ascended. And then we have the years 66, 68, 70, and finally, way out here, there we are, 2023. It's not to scale. So what we need to do first is to kind of get into the apostles' heads. What was the temple to them? And whenever we do scripture interpretation study, we got to get into the heads of the people at the time. These letters, these epistles, these gospels were written to them at their time. What did the temple mean to them? And to them, it was where God and man met. And in their thinking, and very reasonable too, given the way it was constructed, they expected the temple to last thousands of years. And that's so that when Jesus says, not one stone left upon another, they're saying, how? Look at this thing. It took all these years to build, and you're telling me now it's going to all come down. How is that possible? Well, how is it possible? You might not have noticed, but the quarry was limestone. And limestone, under high temperature, crumbles. So when you set fire to a building that has limestone walls, and you reach a certain temperature, the tensile strength of the limestone fails, and now itself crumbles. Otherwise, sure, it would not go down at all, but it was limestone. That's something to remember when you build a building. Okay, so in the apostles' minds, this is a permanent structure. So much so that when Jesus says, not one, he said in all three Gospels, not one stone, not one stone, not one stone. And this is the answer to that question, how great the temple was. And in the minds of the apostles, the temple was going to stand for the rest of time. And if the temple goes, that's it. The world ends. You follow? They are associating the temple with the end of time. Because in their mind, this is such a great place. And therefore, if it's the end of time, that means if the temple goes, that means you, Jesus, are coming back. So there's two time frame questions that appear. Question one, when will these things be? Okay. Two, what will be the sign of your coming and the end of the age? But they're associating both with the destruction of the temple. They're tied together. Okay, so we have here in my little diagram what I call near-term prophecies. And there's a bunch of them. And we have some long-term. But we have fulfilled near-term prophecies. Remember, it happens before 70, or at least by 70. Therefore, it's only something like 37 years later. So he says, okay, temple is going to be destroyed. We're good with that. We know that happened. Deceivers will come. I'll read you, and thank the Lord for Josephus, because he fills in all the blanks. He identifies the deceivers. He tells us what they were up to. Tremendous amount of detail. And again, if you don't happen to have your own personal copy of Josephus, there's one in the library. It's a challenge, I'm going to tell you that, because it's printed in 2-point font. and the writing is a little bit obscure, but it's there. Okay, so if you don't read this like a book. You kind of use this as a reference, but it's really neat. All the things, and you know what amazes me about this? He has the history of the Jews from creation until the time he died. And he has all the details. You know, so-and-so did this, so-and-so relative that, all the detail. How they have it all. But they did. They were part of that oral tradition back then. And of course, we appreciate Josephus for giving evidence of Jesus. Because remember 2 weeks ago, somebody who wrote a book and put it on Amazon said Jesus never existed. Sorry. Josephus says he does. And he quotes it and on and on. And it's not just Josephus. There's also Suetonius, Tacitus, Pliny the Younger, and so forth. Okay. Now, so what are some of these near-term prophecies? Deceivers will come, and in verses 4 and 5. And now remember, Jesus is talking about the period from the time of his death, because when he gave the Olivet Discourse, that's just about the end of his life. So he's saying between here and 70, there's going to be deceivers. There are going to be people who come and say, wait a minute, I'm the Christ. I'm the real Christ. And they'll do all that. There'll be rumors of wars. Well, that's never happened. But there were rumors of wars then. And rumors of wars now too. See, a lot of these things are not just one time only. They were ongoing. So rumors of wars, famines, earthquakes, yeah, you still have that ongoing. So it's a continual process. You, speaking to the apostles, and that's the thing, he's speaking to them directly. You are going to be persecuted. Okay? False prophets, and we spoke about, prophecy, and there were false prophets. Gospel preached to all nations. This is somewhat problematic, because people say, wait a minute, there are tribes in Borneo who have not yet heard the gospel. How do we reconcile that? Anybody? How do we reconcile the fact that the gospel will be preached to all nations, and he's saying this by Matthew 24:14? How is that possible? Well, help me out. Anyone? That was the Roman world. Okay? He's not talking about globally. All nations in the Roman world. And here's what's interesting. Remember I talked about Alexamenos in the year, what year was that? 41. Okay. Alexamenos was this kid. He was studying to be a page in Caligula's court. And he was worshiping Jesus in Rome. Okay, in Rome. And his friends are making fun of him. And they draw a picture of him. Remember that? Where he is worshiping a donkey figure on a cross. Well, the thing is, for that to happen, the preaching of the gospel we know had reached Rome and in the inner court of Caligula. All right, so it's not as amazing as one would think to have the gospel preached throughout the Roman world. If you're talking about globally, but that's not what is indicated. It's the Roman world, that's what they knew. Okay, and then, I love this one, then the end comes. End of what? Okay, end of what? What happens in 70? Okay, what ended? In 70, something ended. The temple ended, and what did that bring about? The end of the Jewish age. That was a radical dividing line between the sacrificial system and the faith system. In other words, in 70, no more burnt offerings. And to guarantee it in a way, the destruction of the temple guaranteed that for the rest of history, there'll be no more burnt offerings. So today, do we see burnt offerings? No, don't see it. Instead, we see synagogues where people go and pray and so forth, but we don't have burnt offerings. That system ended then at AD 70. Okay, the Abomination of Desolation. He sounds like a scary guy. Really. When I was, and of course when you're a young Christian, who do you read? You read the Left Behind series, right? You read Late Great Planet Earth, right? I mean, you get scared out of your mind. So apparently, there's going to be coming this guy called the Abomination of Desolation. What is that? Who is that? Why is that? Well, okay, I'll come back to that. Flee to the mountains. There'll be a great tribulation. And, the thing about the tribulation, how do we understand that? Is it pre-trib? Rapture? Is it post-trib? If I don't know how much of the end time stuff you know, but what do we mean by tribulation and the tribulation, and when does it occur, and who's involved, and so forth? Any questions on this? Okay, all right. And then, of course, in addition to false prophets, you get false messiahs too. Well, why not? Here's the thing that I've been meditating about, and I'm probably full of beans. Okay, I could really be full of beans on this. We know when the tribulation began, right? Pretty much began once the siege of Jerusalem started. When did it end? When did it end? They say, okay, guys, tribulation's over. Okay? 5 o'clock on a Thursday. That's it. No more tribulation. You're done. No. Has the tribulation, and I'm talking, I don't know if this needs a capital T or small t, whatever, but has the tribulation of the Jews ended? No. And I say no. I'm looking at Israel now. I'm looking at the Holocaust. I look at Isabel and Ferdinand and the Spanish Inquisition. You look down through the Crusaders. All the stuff that happened to the Jews throughout the ages. You with me? Like I said, I could be full of beans on this, but I look at the tribulation specifically to the Jewish people over the last 2,000 years. So could it be, I'm just asking, just saying, could it be that the tribulation did not yet have an end point? It's just rolling on, okay? They're just a different place, and different people are doing it, but I'm of the opinion now, and I wasn't last week. The events of Saturday have changed things in my thinking, because, we did not live through the Holocaust. We did not personally experience it. We read about it and all the rest. But to see what's going on tells me that it did not stop at 70 AD. Anyway, okay, so here's the multiple examples. So here's what I ask myself, why are the Jews so hated? And they are. What's going on here with the Jews, and why do they hate them so much? Have you ever thought about that? I mean, they really, really hate them. And they hate them in our country, too. And I think Gallup took a poll just recently, and the majority of the people are on, maybe you are too, I hope not, are on the Palestinian side. They're on Hamas's side. I hope you're okay with that. Well, you probably want to stone me. But the majority of people are on the side of Hamas, and they hate Jews with a ever-loving passion. See, here's the thing. The Jews have enemies that say, we're going to kill you. When your enemy says they're going to kill you, you ought to believe them. You ought to believe them, because they mean it. Huh? So, I don't have well, I do have an answer for that. But does anyone have a thought on why there's ongoing, systematic anti-Semitism? Any thoughts? And it's true. It really is. People aren't hating ancient Egyptians, right? Not anybody else. No other race has this level of hatred towards them.
I think ultimately it's the hatred of God.
Yeah, I agree with that. It's hatred of God. Because whose side are the Jews on? Now, they might not be perfect in many ways, but they are essentially on God's side.
Well, they were God's chosen race.
They're God's chosen race.
Most people, I think, in the modern world kind of know that,
that
God chose the Jews to be his.
So because of that, having been chosen by God, they're hated by the world. And, off record here, I am very concerned, this is off record, about what will happen in our country to synagogues in the coming months. I'm very concerned because we've already had synagogue attacks, and now we have a system of, letting them all in, and I suspect we will read. I could be wrong, remember, Landry could be full of beans, but that's my suspicion. Okay, and despite all the attacks throughout time, okay, despite it all, the one thing you can be sure of is you can't get rid of the Jews. Yeah. They tried over and over and over again. They try to get rid of them, and they can't get rid of them. Why is that? Any thoughts? They're part of the fulfillment. Right? And Paul has this example. He says, picture a vine, a grapevine, and I don't know if you know about grafting, but the bottom part of the grapevine has had a new part stuck into the top, grafted in, so that the life that we draw from, the spiritual life, in terms of the Testaments and so forth, is from the Old Testament. We're drawing from it because we've been grafted into the vine. Now, here's the thing. What happens to the upper part of the vine if you kill off the bottom part? We are dependent, in a sense, of this system working. Now, we don't agree with animal sacrifice and all that, but we are dependent upon the life of the Jewish faith to support ours, and that's right from Paul. When I grew up in a Jewish area. We spent a lot of time with Jews. I really did. My best friend, Ray Herskovich. Okay, lived next door. Okay, he and I good buddies. When I went off to college, my roommate, Jake Hansen. Okay, well, he's a bit strange, but Jake Hansen. Okay, they would take my Jewish friends. We would go into a place called Squirrel Hill, appropriately named, and Squirrel Hill was the place where the Tree of Life synagogue was attacked about 4 years ago. Anyway, we lived next door to Jews. We lived amongst Jews. I went to Jewish homes. I ate their food. I knew kind of what they were like. So I have a special affinity because of my growing up. So they're never eradicated, but this is why God has kept them around. Because it could easily. So here's Hamas saying, we're going to get rid of all the Jews. Well, good luck with that, Charlie. All right. So the continuing prophecies, and by this, I'm talking about prophecies that are going here out past us in 2023. Deceivers, rumors of war. See, I'm saying we still have that. Those things are still taking place. But the Great Tribulation is ongoing. Okay, I want to read these verses from that. I want to ask you, what does this sound like? From then there will be great distress, unequaled from the beginning of the world unto now, and never to be equaled again. If those days had not been cut short, no one would survive. But for the sake of the elect, those days will be shortened. Immediately after the distress of those days, the sun will be darkened and the moon will not give its light. Okay, what does that sound like? Sounds like nuclear war. I'll tell you why. Unequaled from the beginning of the world to now, never to be equaled again. Okay. No one would survive unless it was cut short. The sun's darkened. That's called nuclear winter. Throw up all the stuff. So in my personal opinion, and it's still developing, and granted, I'm going to say this again, this is not gospel. This is just me being full of beans. But I'm sensing that this is what's being talked about. Because it's unequaled again. Well, what do you think? Now see, meanwhile, back in Iran, who's developing nuclear weapons?
Iran.
No. And who would they say they want to see killed? Jews and us. Ought we to believe them?
Yes.
I think we should. You follow? Mm-hmm. Or am I just, this is not gospel, this is just me, opining. What do you think? This will be on the quiz. Okay, any questions? Ron, anything?
Well, I have the same feeling about it. I really do. it would not surprise me if we are not close to the end times. The thing that's happening now with Putin, who recently threatened to start testing nuclear weapons again, and I think he's pretty crazy. And then this thing in Israel and Palestine, it could be very easily be, getting close. And I think you're going to see the church fuller.
Yeah.
Well, I really do.
Okay. Well, like I said, I could be full. Yes.
And one of Jesus' name got a consuming fire.
Consuming
yeah.
fire,
Yeah. So I'm trying to fit together this unequaled from the beginning of the world until now, and never to be equaled again. Huh? How does that work? All right. Unfulfilled long-term. The parousia is the fancy word for second coming. Okay. Now here's the thing. In terms of prophecies, this is the last one to be fulfilled. What are we waiting for? Now, Hal Lindsey and the other guy, they say, well, there's going to be a whole bunch of other things. And I say, no, the next thing that happens, the next thing is he comes. He comes. And when does he come? It's one of the chapter questions. I don't know. Okay, I have no idea. When does Jesus come? I don't know. When is the resurrection? I don't know. But I know it's coming, huh? Not even Jesus knows, right? Did you remember reading that? Where it says not even the angels don't know, not even the Son, only the Father knows? Yeah, just him. And then at that same point in Scripture, he gives a number of parables. I call it the thief in the night. Thief in the night. The 10 virgins. And the 10 virgins, that's a story about they weren't prepared, they burnt up their oil, all that. Parable of the talents. That's the one where the guy who just arrived got paid as much as the guys who worked all day. And then the sheep and the goats. Okay? And the sheep and the goats get separated. All right. But those are long-term, those are prophecies about the second coming. And the message then is stay faithful, stay vigilant. You do not know the day or the hour. Huh? And this comes in week 6, so I'm not going to go any further with that. Okay, hold on a second, bud. What ends? Well, I think we already talked about that. What ends is the Jewish system of worship. What does taken mean? Okay. Yeah? Now, this is opposite to what you read in end-time books. End-time books. And this, by the way, is verse 40 and 41. And the context here is Noah's flood. Verse 37 to 39, where the flood took them all away. Who did the flood take away? The bad guys. Okay? Who was left behind? So in the Left Behind series, we want to not be taken away because taken away is the judgment. Right? So this contrasts with other teachers who believe there will be a pre-tribulation rapture. And, a lot of this I don't know. That's why I call it, selected topics. But they place all of the Olivet Discourse in the far future. And I don't. So, and you skipped over the Abomination of Desolation. All right, let me go to that. The Abomination of Desolation comes to us from Daniel. Comes to us from the year 167 BC. Okay? They didn't have very good photographs back then, so the best we can do is a statue. Antiochus Epiphanes. And Epiphanes is added to his name. It means the image of God. He did not have a problem with identity. But what he did, he was the Greek from Persia, comes in, takes away the daily sacrifice. Okay? He says, Jews, no more daily sacrifice. And then he himself stands in the holy place. And what does he do there? He appoints a Hellenized high priest who sacrifices a pig on the burnt offer. If you know anything about Jews and pigs, they don't go together. They might like the smell of bacon, but they don't go together. The worst thing you could do in the holy place is to sacrifice and burn a pig. You see what I'm saying? So he did some real desecration. So he desecrated, it makes desecrated or abhorrent. Abhorrent. Terrible thing. So Daniel, short-term, long-term fulfillment. And we see this often where there's both short and long-term fulfillments. Okay? So Antiochus Epiphanes was the short-term fulfillment of Daniel's prophecy. Would there be a longer term? Within 40 years of Jesus' words, 40 years, so we're talking about before 70, the temple in Jerusalem was again desecrated. And this happened in 69, right here, in 69. And at this time it came from the Zealots. Remember we talked about Zealots about a year ago. The Zealots. Zealots were Pharisees with swords. They were like the Proud Boys. I mean, they were radical. The Zealots, yeah. Anyway, let me tell the story. In 68 AD, well, what happens in 68? In 68, Nero dies. And we say, okay, good, we didn't need him anyway. But when Nero dies, there is unrest in Jerusalem. Annas incited the people to rise up against the Zealots who were robbing the people. And here's the thing that's important. The Zealots were using the temple of Jerusalem as their base of operations. In the minds of Jews, they saw this an abomination because they put away the sacrifice. There was no more operational sacrifice. All they had was the Zealots using the temple as their base. Okay, let me just skip that one. Candidates for the abomination. Okay, candidates. We have a couple. Caligula is often named, Roman emperor. And he tried to put his own statue in the temple. And the Jews said, don't do that. And he backed off and didn't. Anyway, it's 41 AD, and that's too soon. It's too soon. Titus also doesn't work because verse 15 says that he is standing in the holy place. And Titus cannot be standing in the holy place because the holy place is going to be knocked down. So it's not Titus. But who works? The Zealots work because within Jerusalem, during the siege, the Zealots are also at war with other Jews in the temple area. In Jerusalem, it says, remained in the hands of the Zealots until the siege in AD 70. So who are these guys? We're intimately connected with the Roman history. Otto and Vespasian. Okay. First century Caesars. Okay. Nero, as I said, he dies in 68. Galba, he takes over, and he only lasts about 7 months before he's murdered. Otto comes in, and he lasts, 4 months or so, and he commits suicide. That's followed by Vespasian. Where did Vespasian come from? He was the guy who was running the siege of Rome. So there was a very brief period of time where there's a lull in the Jewish war between April 69 and July 69. Very brief time. During that time, one of the commanders, a guy named Cestius, and again, thank you, Josephus, for telling us all. Josephus messes up royally. And what he did, he allowed the Zealots to overcome the Roman forces. So the Zealots come out of the city, attack the Romans, and Cestius loses 5,300 foot soldiers and 80 horsemen. That is a legion. He loses a whole legion. The Zealots return singing and dancing. And wars, that's the Jewish wars according to Josephus. Zealots returned to the city singing and dancing. Hooray. The Jews thought they won the war. Why wouldn't they? Okay? They sent the Zealots out. They destroyed a legion. They come back. The Christians, however, took another view of things. Once those doors opened, they left. So, the abomination means something beyond that which is mysterious and mythical. It means when you see it, flee to the mountains. To the Jews, it says when you see it, you go into the most fortified city in Israel. Remember, there are also the Jews outside of Jerusalem. They say, you know what, we're vulnerable out here. Jerusalem is really a big, important, and well-fortified place. We're going to go into Jerusalem. And the Christians says, and hurry up. And they had to hurry up. They really only had a couple of days. Only a couple of days. The Jews doubled down because the Romans had killed 5,300 Romans. Jews did. No Christians died in the fall of Jerusalem, even though they were there. Okay? We know this from Eusebius. All right. So, why is it important that the Christians not be in Jerusalem when it fell? Why is that important? Where would the church be had the church been subjected to that fall? If that was the case, even though in 70 the church was in various places, the Jerusalem church was the heart of it. And if the Christians died at that fall, then the Christian church in Jerusalem would have been wiped out. And it could very well have spelled the end of Christianity there and then. So Jesus specifically warns them, when you see these things happening, get out of town. They ran to a place called Pella, east of the Jordan in the mountains. There's Jerusalem, there's Pella. And it looks like it's about 60 miles away or something like that. Okay. False messiahs, that's a lot, and I don't want to get into that. We'll save false messiahs for next time. But up to this point here, I know I've been doing a lot of talking. Come on, ask me some questions. Anything you'd like to know? Anything? Please? All right. What do you think? Now, yes?
I had a question about being taken.
Okay. Taken away to judgment.
I didn't want that to happen to you.